Ready? All right, it's a minute past 2, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. We're really excited to have you all join us today on behalf of the Cycle Wellness Initiative. I'm really excited to welcome you all to today's virtual event, Laboratory Medicine Toolkit, What We Were Never Taught. My name is Anna Merrill, and I'll be moderating today's session. Before we get started, there's just a few housekeeping items that I'd like to go over. There is one accent credit that will be available for attending the session, so you will receive an email with how to claim this credit after the session. We have 2 presenters who will each speak for about 20 minutes. There should be 15 to 20 minutes left at the end for Q&A, so please enter your questions in the chat, and I will relay them to our presenters at the conclusion of both of their presentations. Please make sure that you stay muted for the entirety of the session. The session will be recorded, and a link to the recording will be posted on the Cycle website. Now, we are lucky today to have 2 wonderful speakers who are both dedicated to fostering the professional development of early career individuals. And I'll introduce them both now so that they can do their presentations back to back. Our first presenter is Dr. Joe Alkhouri. Dr. Alkhouri is Associate Professor of Laboratory Medicine at Yale School of Medicine and Director of the Clinical Chemistry Laboratory and COMAC Fellowship Program at Yale New Haven Health. He completed his training at the Yale School of Management's Emerging Leaders Program and currently serves on the editorial boards of Clinical Chemistry and Clinical Biochemistry, as chair of the IFCC Committee on Kidney Disease and on the board of directors for ADLM. He also launched his own YouTube channel entitled Clinical Chemistry with Joe Alkhouri that infuses science with comedy and is focused on improving laboratory medicine practice. Our second presenter will be Dr. Sarah Wheeler. Dr. Wheeler is Associate Professor of Pathology at the University of Pittsburgh, Medical Director of Clinical Chemistry at UPMC Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh, Medical Director of the Automated Testing Laboratory at UPMC Mercy Hospital, and Associate Medical Director of Clinical Immunopathology at UPMC. Additionally, she is the point-of-care license holder for an innovative in-home urgent care program at UPMC and the STAT Medvac Emergency Transport Group. Her research interests include infectious disease serology screening assays, rapid point-of-care diagnostics, effect of viral infections on autoimmunity, machine learning to improve diagnosis, and appropriate serology testing in children with immune dysregulation. Now I will hand it over to Dr. Alkhouri.
Thank you, Dr. Merrill. I will share my screen and get us off. Good start. It's so nice to see so many familiar faces and names. So happy to be talking to you all on some of the lessons I've learned in time management tools for a lab professional. I will say that I am by no means a time management expert. These are the tips that I share from what I've learned over the years from trying to take care of this issue that I've faced when I've had too many projects that I'm working on and not enough time to do all of them. So the goal from this will be, and these are my disclosures, not relevant to the discussion, but the goals from this will be to essentially share with you a concept that where all of this comes together in the beginning. So some philosophical introduction to the discussion, then going into 10 tips that hopefully you'll take a couple of them that you might find helpful and try to implement them in your own lives and practice. But some of the examples I use here have articles that are referenced to HBR, which is the Harvard Business Review, and I link all of those for you, for those of you interested in reading more, because we only have 20 minutes, so I'll do my best to kind of get everything we need to do in that time frame, and hopefully happy to discuss this further during the Q&A or anytime later, whether it's at the next ADLM meeting or the Cycle meetups. But taking a step back and thinking of the concept of trying to manage time. Time is finite, although we may not think of it that way because, obviously we don't know when it will end for us individually. So we just, keep taking on tasks and saying yes to things. And especially when you're taught to always say yes in the early phases of your career, you kind of adopt that mentality. And when you're an assistant professor or a fellow resident trainee, you generally have time. So you're saying yes and you're taking all of these things on. But then you get to a point where you're asked to do a lot and you don't have time. And so now you're in this kind of struggle to figure out, well, how can I manage all of these projects? And I want to do them all, but you kind of have this finite time to do it. So this is why I like kind of starting with this concept where it's the equivalent of trying to fill this plastic bucket essentially up. And if I was to start by filling it up with golf balls, I would basically just put all these golf balls in, and you would look at this and I ask you, is this full? And you'd say, yeah, it's full for you can't add any more golf balls. And then I would get a cup of sand, and then I would drop that cup of sand inside, and I've just filled that whole cup up with sand, even though you said it's full. And I ask you again, is this full? You would look at this and say, yeah, it looks pretty full. And then I get a cup of coffee, and then I pour that coffee over everything I've filled in. And because I can't do any better animation, usually I do this, in the meeting in person, I'm actually doing this. So here I'm, with this Buddha animation, just imagine now this thing is filled with coffee. So I was able to fill all these three things in, even though at every step of the way, you said it was full. So I guess the lesson learned here is you can do it all, stop complaining, right? Like you're never full. That's not it. Really, what I'm trying to say here is if I tried filling these things in that cup differently, where I started with the sand or the coffee, I wouldn't have been able to add as many golf balls in, right? Because the golf balls can't fit as many on top of sand, which goes through. So it's really, you have to start to fill this the way we did completely. You start by adding in the golf balls and then filling in the sand. And what that represents is priorities. Like, what are the golf balls in your life or workplace? You have to start by filling your time up with these things that are the highest priority for you. And then with whatever space you have left, you'd fill in with the sand, which are these things that are lowest priority or things you're taking in for others or work you're contributing for others. And that is the way you should do it, instead of like trying to fit all of it together, which is how I used to do it when I was an assistant professor, just taking all of these things in, and then there are things I cared about that I wasn't working on, and that's the outcome. And then you might ask, well, what does the cup of coffee represent? The answer is, if you do this right, you would have time to have coffee with a friend, and that wouldn't kill you. So I really want to kind of dive deep into how do we get to that stage? Because one of the biggest problems that people face, now I certainly faced early on, is how do you identify the differences between golf balls and sand? Because it's obvious in the image, but in reality, it's not as obvious. And there are many things we take on, or projects we take on, that we think they're golf balls, but they're really sand. And let's kind of start there. So if I was in a room and I had more time, because that's what I did when I had more time in this presentation at the annual meeting, I basically asked all the attendees to write down their 16 professional goals that they're thinking of right now, ranking them in order of preference. So 1 is what matters most to you. And again, if I had time now, I would basically be asking you to do this. But we don't, so let's just kind of go through this exercise, assuming you wrote down 16 down there. And then what I would say is, check when you do this, and hopefully you do this after the session, check for these 16. How many have you worked on this last week? If you have, put a checkbox next to that. And what you see during that time is attendees are going through various, like, 1 I've worked on this last week, maybe 3, maybe 6, 7, maybe 12, and maybe 15, what you've actually worked on for this last week. And then once they've done that, you share, okay, how many of your, let's say, top 5 you didn't work on at all? And many will have maybe 3, 4 they haven't touched, or number 10, 11, they can list a couple. But then we share, okay, like, there's a concept in terms of identifying priorities that says, if you have your top 5 clearly, everything that's below your top 5 is essentially sand right now. It's a distraction. And that strikes people hard because many think like, oh, well, these are things I care about. And yes, they're important, but they're not your top 5 right now. And you have finite time and energy to deal with these things. So all of your energy and time should be dedicated to your top 5 goals. The rest you should avoid at all costs, because they're your distractions. And you should only accommodate them if you have time through the week. But your top 5 you should always be working on. And I choose to do that on a week-to-week basis. So I make sure every week I am working on my top 5, and we'll talk about how we do that in a bit. But basically, the goal from this is to make sure that you're not spending time on the bottom from like 6 to 16 at the sake of spending time on your top 5. But that's what happens often. We're often letting the goals that matter to us the most not get the attention and time they need. So try to do this, and you could do this like regularly. And it's important to say, it's not that you'll never get the goal 6 to 16, but once you finish goals from the top 5, you can then do this exercise again, reassess, see what now is your top 5, and work on those. It's not to say that things that are low are never making it in the top 5. They can, but sometimes they can't, and those are goals you should avoid. So once you've done that, the next step, once you've identified your goals, is figuring out which ones are things that require your attention. And this is a scale that's called the Covey's 4 quadrant. That's basically split by urgency and importance. Things that are clearly urgent and important, especially that are common in our roles as lab directors, like when a patient case comes up that requires your immediate attention and you need to deal with it, you obviously deal with it. That's, based on this box, that's something you should focus on and get taken care of. If it's something that's not urgent but still important, these are the things that you need to schedule. And we'll talk about that part in greater detail. If it's urgent but not important, these are great tasks to delegate, especially if you have trainees or people you work with in your lab who could benefit from taking on these activities. So you find people who are interested in this work and you delegate that work to them. It's urgent, but it's not really that important, and it's a great lesson for somebody to learn that experience. You can delegate that. Finally, if it's not urgent or not important, then why are you doing this? And so I know that this is a simplistic kind of concept, just to say how you think about your tasks, and based on this bucket, you can decide how to deal with it. But again, many tasks may show up, and it's hard for us to really classify it as one or the other. So we end up treating some things that are not urgent or important as urgent and important and try to get this done. But the other key thing I want to mention is the most important quadrant for career satisfaction is the top right quadrant, the not urgent but important. These are typically things that don't get the attention that they deserve because they're not urgent, but they're important to you. Let's say whether it's writing a paper on a topic that's of interest that you don't have time to do because you're always dealing with urgent clinical things that your patients need. But you have to be able to create time if it's something that's important for you and figure out how to make that work. And so it's important to say most often what is sacrificed is the not urgent but important, and people need to figure out ways to make that happen. So we'll talk about that as well. So tip number 3 is, if you've identified those goals and some of them are really big and daunting, you're looking up that mountain, you're like, I don't know how to climb, I don't want to climb that mountain. I'll just add this happy kind of or helpful statement that a goal without a plan is just a wish. If you're not putting a plan of how you're going to target that big goal, you're never going to get there. You're always going to be thinking about it. I want to do this, I want to do this, but you really haven't planned how to do it. You'll never do it. So it's important to plan how you're going to spend your time to work on these goals. And I'll talk about how we do that in a bit. But just wanted to share, this is kind of a quote that I keep in the back of my mind when I'm thinking about something constantly, but I haven't made time in my schedule to deal with it or have a plan of attack. The example I'll use for doing that is this tip from kind of working on an AKI guidance document. It's a huge deal. It's a year-long project that I've worked on. And I basically kind of started by breaking it up and putting a line in the sand. And I would send an email to the group I was working with and saying which step we're on, and just giving them a deadline that I've created for 2 weeks to do the simple task, which is add 1 to 3 questions so that we can move on. So you start taking this big thing and only focusing one step at a time and sharing those and working with your team to kind of specifying the tasks, the deadlines, and who's accountable. And I usually also involve continuous follow-up with these people when you're working with teams to make progress. That's what you need to do on big projects. If you ever feel like you're stuck and you're not moving forward with the project you care about, try breaking it down into individual pieces and only focus on that next step. What do you need to get there? So moving it step at a time. The 4th tip, and this is probably the most important one, I think, is drop to-do lists and pick up time boxing. Time boxing is a concept where you start specifically making time for things you want to work on in your calendar. And this is an example of how your calendar could be stacked up with not just meetings, which is how most people use their calendar, but also your own time. You're booking your own time to work on specific tasks. And there's a ton of advantages to doing that versus a to-do list. A to-do list is a set of tasks with no associated time to work on them. So it never gets done. It's a source of great anxiety for people who are never finishing a to-do list. And you're not finishing it because you're not trying to put these tasks into your calendar. So time boxing, it takes it to the next level where you're taking those tasks off your to-do lists and into your calendars. And the other benefits of doing this is you can visualize how your work fits with the rest of your work in your calendar. You can better collaborate with colleagues who can now see your calendar or depend on you to finish certain projects by a certain timeline. And you also have a good record of work. Like, what did you do last year? You can go back to a certain date and know almost exactly what you've been working on, which is helpful to see. And then you also get a sense of control of your time and not just tasks. So if you need to move things around, you can always do that with time boxing, but you can control that. And for me personally, I agree with that last statement, and I'll share that. That's the article from HBR on the bottom, type if you need it. And we're sharing all the slides in the end as PDF. But it really helped me become more productive. And I highly recommend this to anyone who's struggling right now as far as kind of getting work done and not finding time to do it. The other tip I'll share is kind of just moving through these is try to reduce meetings from, like, people do 1 hour meetings and they're back to back. That you never have time to take a bio break or move from one meeting to the other, or even follow up on action items, right? Like, I'll use the example in psychiatry. You know, if when you see a psychiatrist, after they're done, you know, you spend 50 minutes for them, but they bill you for the hour, because for the next 10 minutes, they're spending time preparing your report, following up on any medications they need to take care of, which is part of your treatment plan. And that's a concept that we should apply to our meetings as well. Instead of finishing on the hour, running to the next meeting, and always being stressed for the whole day, make time for taking care of the action items right after that meeting, taking a bio break if you need it, then moving on. So you're not spending time after 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock doing these things. And so one recommendation is really, like, try to shorten those meetings. And I still book with my team meetings I control for the whole hour, but we agree to end it at the 45-minute mark. And if you're a team leader, I highly encourage you to do this for you and the rest of your team's benefit. There is nothing that you can't get done in 45 minutes that needs an hour. So it's about being more efficient and still getting this done with a reasonable time, and leaving time for people to have a bio break or follow-up action items. The other tip I'll share, which is, again, another HBR article, it's called Untouchable Day, or half a day if you can't get a full day at your work. For me, that's Fridays. I basically decided at some point implemented this, and I do not accept any meetings on Fridays. That's my academic day. I use that day to work on any projects or papers I care about that I need to get done. And it helps me maintain my academic productivity while still being a clinical director overseeing the lab. Happy to talk, you know, in the Q&A if somebody's curious, how do you manage clinical focus versus academic? But just, you know, for everybody's sake, it's an untouchable day where you do not accept meetings, so you can have focus time to work on these projects that need it. No interruptions, no dealing with emails, and that's up to you if you want to take emails or not. But generally, the untouchable day focus is about getting that focus time you need to work on these projects that need it. The other tip that is similar, but I've learned from a colleague who works at Pfizer. Apparently Pfizer does this. They have quote focus weeks every 3 months. So focus weeks means for the whole company, all meetings are canceled. People get a whole week to catch up on whatever projects they're working on. It's something I haven't implemented here, but it's something I'm thinking about, and I like the concept. And just imagine, like, if you had a whole week instead of going to another meeting, you know, these recurring weekly meetings where it doesn't seem to be like a significant benefit, that you can kind of catch up to things and focus on these items that need to get done. Focus weeks allow you to do that. So it's something to consider. And tip number 8 looks at environmental controls. That's another way that you know, if you're really trying to get that focus time, whether it's your untouchable day or you have half a day or 2 hours you really want to focus on certain activities, try to use physical and electronic environmental controls. I have this sign on my door that I bought for Amazon for $10. And by the way, every other manager in my and director in my office area has bought this sign and put it up on their door. Basically, it signals to your team whether you're out of the office or whether, you know, you're available to them, or you're busy doing something else, whether in a meeting or taking care of something that needs your focus. That environmental control kind of avoids this knock on the door, enter, and you're busy trying to focus on something, gets interrupted, takes you time to get back to that focus. Avoids all of that, because people then know when you're available and when you're not. You just have to keep it up to date and make sure you stick with it, so you don't leave it one way or another. Otherwise, it loses its own value. And every time I open my door and close it, I'm consciously rotating it to indicate whether I'm available or not, or out of the office. Before I put this up, I have to say I talked to my team extensively to explain what the benefit of doing this, and they even loved it because our lab is open space. So from far away, they could tell if it's red or green or red, blue, and not have to walk all the way knock to find out I'm not in the office or I'm not available. So in a way, it's also positive for them and positive for me. So when I'm having these interactions with them, it's meaningful. I don't feel bothered that my time is being interrupted and my focus is being interrupted while I work on these other projects. Same goes for electronic controls. You have tools in Outlook and on your phone that you can put yourself in offline. The first thing I did when someone taught me how to do it was remove the messaging that Outlook gives you every time an email comes in. That doesn't happen with me. You can even remove the number that shows up to tell you that there's emails coming in, or simply operate in offline mode so you don't see new emails coming in. So that's something that I highly recommend so you can maintain your focus when you're working on certain projects. If you do not work in an office and you're a cubicle worker, there are other things that you can controls that you can implement, and these exist that can signal to your team whether you're available or not, so you're not constantly interrupted. Especially some people, put a kind of use earplugs, or use maybe like put some AirPods on. This helps kind of communicate that so the team doesn't interrupt you as you try to get to focus. And if you don't have an office or a cubicle, then I love this sign I found online where somebody creatively created a do not disturb sign. But just kind of to say, yeah, it gets harder to do, but there are certain small controls you could use, and I strongly recommend using these environmental controls, whether it's the small signs you can purchase or one for your door if you have an office, so you're not disturbed. So for remote workers, I'll say feeling pressure. I've gotten this question where people feel like they can't do this because the expectation when you're remote or online is that you answer immediately within a certain way. One thing you can do is add a statement in your signature, and I've seen that says what is your typical response time to emails, and you should basically try to avoid these texts or calls for urgent cases only. I know I have colleagues who love to text, or like even if it's not something that's urgent, and that's very disturbing or interrupting, I say. So if it's not a clinical case, I respond by saying, can you please send me an email so I can follow up on this? I'm trying to get this done. And that immediately sets the boundary and signal that if it's not urgent patient care, don't text me because it's important for you right now. It is not urgent. I will get to this within 24 hours if you email me. But let's not make everything urgent, especially when we're trying to get our focus time to get other work done. And so finally, the last bit I'll focus on is how do you bring this all together in a time budget? That's the calendar, and I basically went like 3 to 4 weeks ahead in my calendar and started imagining how I would like my calendar to be and blocking time for it. And I'll show you quickly, this is an old example, but what I've done also, in addition to like meetings, I scheduled my lab walkthroughs, I scheduled my weekend email catch up, my email and my planning for the day, and coffee in the morning. And in addition to, like, I don't take meetings after 4 because that's when I wrap up my email. I don't want to be working after 5. I'm going home to be with my family. And I have an hour urgent time blocked every day. If something comes up, I can handle. So I strongly encourage you to kind of do this and try out. And it will be different for everyone. If you have flexibility in your calendar, you can do this. And I know I'm at time. So the last thing I will say is your life is short. This is your life in a number of weeks, and many of them are in school or retired. So you don't have a lot of time. Take advantage and implement these concepts. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to deal with them. With that, thank you, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Wheeler.
Thank you so much, Joe. I have to admit, since seeing this, I've implemented a couple of these things. So that's been very exciting since seeing your last talk. So work-life harmony, one of the things that we often talk about is work-life balance, which gives us this idea that there is opposition between our work, what's happening at work, and what's happening in the rest of our lives. And I like instead to think about harmony. If you have paper and pen, or want to open a Word document or a notes thing in your phone, go ahead and just start writing down all of the different identities that you have in your life. So all of us have, kind of a work identity that may be a medical director, a lab technologist, a scientist. And then we have kind of all of these other things that we are. We're friends, we're family members, and we also have hobbies, which we might identify with. And the idea about work-life harmony is that all of those pieces come together to create a whole. So in music, Every note has a sound, and when you put many notes together to create a harmony, it creates this beautiful sound that's greater than the sum of its parts. And that's kind of what we're after in this work-life harmony idea. What can happen to us is that we can overinvest in one of these identities. And sometimes that's really necessary for a season. And part of the reason that I became interested in work-life harmony was because, like so many of us, during COVID, I had to overinvest in my professional life. And as we were kind of coming out of COVID and workload was coming down, I was unclear on how to start trying to pull that harmony back. So what I'm going to share today is not that I have this all figured out, but these are things that I started doing a lot of reading, a lot of research, and I'm going to share with you the things that I found to be helpful. So keep that list of identities close, as well as that document that you started it on, because we're going to have some more things. So in all of the reading that I did, basically every book about work-life harmony or improving ourselves came down to this: how do we live a meaningful life? And that might look different for everyone, but that was really what all of this literature was after. And, you know, there is, I'd like to acknowledge the popular culture idea of living a meaningful life, which is this, that you must apparently be a person by yourself at sunrise or sunset out in nature, and that constitutes a meaningful life. And I think for most of us, we would, when we state it that way, disagree. That really part of what makes our life meaningful is that we have all of these other people in our lives. We do things that we feel affect our corner of the world and make meaningful contributions to it. And because of that, it means that real life is messy and can feel a little bit more like this. We are juggling a lot of balls in the air, and sometimes it feels like we have no idea how to juggle and people are just throwing things at us. And really our goal here is that regardless of how many balls we're juggling, that we can learn how to juggle them. The number of things that we can juggle is definitely not infinite, but any of us who have more than one thing happening in our life are going to have to learn how to juggle. And so I'd like to share today some concrete ideas for how we can learn to juggle and work with other people to create these kind of beautiful sequences in our lives. So I'd like to take a quick 30 seconds in that document that you started for you to list 3 things you'd like to do less of in your life and 3 things you'd like to do more of in your life. Don't overthink it. These can be very simple. I will talk through a few that I have encountered as you think about things. So things that I always would love to do less of: commuting, email. I think we all could use less email, dishes or cleaning kinds of things. For many people, social media is something they'd like to do less of. Things we'd like to do more of: time with close friends often comes up, cooking often comes up, reading or other hobbies, people that we'd like to prioritize. Okay, so now that you've got a few things that you'd like to do less of and more of, put those in your pocket. And as we go through each of these tips, look at that list and see if we can use any of these tips to do either less or more of these things in your life. So the last kind of thing before we dive into it is that living a meaningful life is going to require behavior change if we want to make changes. And unfortunately, there's a lot of literature on this as well, and there are no magic bullets, no miracle cures. And what the research says to date is that behavior change is really hard, and we can't make it easy. But the best evidence we have about ways to successfully make behavior change are making small changes or nudges. And those small changes and nudges can really change our trajectory. And so that's what we're going to focus on today. So when we look at obstacles to work-life harmony, they fall, I think, into kind of 3 categories: psychological obstacles, which require a different kind of approach than things like external realities, which are also a problem, and then technical errors, which we're going to talk about as opportunities, things that maybe we just didn't know that we should try them, and so we haven't tried them yet. And this framework I find very helpful for many things, and it's from this Morgenstern work in 2004. So our first psychological obstacle are our expectations. I'm hoping that you're laughing a little bit because this is my favorite picture in the whole presentation. So we're talking not just about our expectations, but about the expectations of other people that we allow to affect us. And for often these expectations are completely unrealistic. So if you look at that list of roles that you have in your life, I'd like you to look at that and consider what your expectations are. What are you expecting of yourself in each of those roles? Do you expect yourself to wear a cape in every single one of those roles? And that's not necessarily something we would expect of other people, but we often expect that of ourselves. In the same way, we would not expect this very adorable child to do a deadlift with this weight. And I think often what we're seeing kind of societally as well as professionally is we see the highlights of people's trajectories. And so it looks like, life should be this straight line from where we are to where we want to be, but really it is rather messy. And reflecting or journaling can really help with this. And the second tip here is related to this considering our expectations and resetting them. And that is perfectionism. To be honest, perfectionism runs pretty rampant both in our society and in our profession because we self-select for high achieving individuals. And so in this version, as we consider our expectations, we're going to ask, what is enough? So that project that we've been working on that we just haven't been able to make any movement on, what would be considered enough for us to say that is successfully completed? And do we need to change what that looks like? I love this value versus effort graph, where we look at the value of that we're getting back for the effort that we put in. And as we kind of approach the top, we get this point of diminishing returns where we continue to put in effort, but we're really not adding any value. And figuring out where that is for projects and in our personal lives is really important. And I think related to that is that we should acknowledge, I remind myself to acknowledge all of our humanity. We're not robots. We do have emotions. And so when we show up to these psychological obstacles, we also have to acknowledge that part of ourselves. So the next section is external realities. There are some things that just take the time they take that we have no control over. Whether you are getting little ones ready to get out the door or you are stuck in traffic, those are not things that we can control, and they are external realities. And as much as we try to reduce our meetings, we've all been stuck in a meeting like that one. And we all have different chapters in our lives. So there may be things happening in this particular chapter of our life that we can't control. We may have physical limitations. We all need different amounts of sleep. And approaching these external realities requires a different set of tools. So tip number 3 is really hard. This is one that I'm continually revisiting. And I love this kind of definition of acceptance. We can say that we really don't like rain, but that does not change the fact that it is raining. And acceptance is saying, yeah, it's raining. There's nothing we can do about that. I think the advanced move here is to grab an umbrella, to do what we can about it. Just because it's raining doesn't mean I need to go stand outside in the rain without an umbrella. And the really pro move here is to put on your rain boots and go jump in puddles, put on your dancing shoes, go dance in the rain. Recognize that external reality and figure out a way to have it work for you. And that sounds trite. I think this is where I at least often, when I'm finding myself frustrated with something that I can't seem to get to function, it's because it's an external reality that I haven't yet recognized as such. Tip number 4, this is perhaps the most depressing piece of advice I have ever received, but also one of the most useful. This was from my PhD mentor, and she said, if you're working on a project, take however long you think it's going to take and multiply that by pi. And that is eerily accurate. And part of that's simply that life is unexpected. Things are always going to take longer than we expect. And anytime we try to cram too much into too little time, it's going to stress us out and we're going to feel kind of out of harmony. And the advanced move here is things that we do frequently, figure out how long that's taking you, track that so that you have a reasonable reference point. I was actually just talking to a colleague last night, and they have the same metric that for a 1-hour talk that they're making from scratch, it takes them about 20 hours. And that's a helpful thing when we're trying to plan to say yes or no to things. So tip number 5 is to create a backup slot. A caveat here is that everything we do cannot have a backup slot. Choosing your things wisely is very important for this tip. But if it is something that's really important, you should have a backup slot or backup plan for it. So I have some examples here, so I'm using a lot of examples for myself because I am the person that I have permission to share about. But there are a lot of examples that you could think of here. A friend that I have has kids that are kind of preteen, teenage age. So the household is always very busy. Somebody is always sick. And when we try to get together, often somebody is sick, somebody has to go somewhere for something they didn't let her know about. And so we will set up, say drinks after work on Friday, and then also hiking Saturday morning. And if we can make the drinks on Friday, great. We've got Saturday morning open. If not, then we meet up Saturday morning. And that makes sure that we're able to prioritize those things. I will say this doesn't work very well for something that you've been procrastinating, because then you just blow through your first slot. So we're going to move into technical opportunities. So these are kind of small, although not necessarily easy changes that we can make that can really have an outsized impact. So the next two are really ways that we can be ready for life. So the first one is have a bedtime. Most of us have an alarm for when we get up, but we don't necessarily have an alarm for when we go to bed. And I am fully recognizing here that if you have a small child at home, if you have insomnia, that even talking about this can generate some frustration. But where possible, getting enough rest means that the next day is going to go much better. Kind of a side effect of this is that we then have to prioritize the things that are happening in our evenings. And so we don't just kind of keep doing things until we run out of things to do, but instead we're saying, okay, I've only got 2 hours. This is what I need to do. Technical opportunity number 7 is planning on Friday. This has been one of my favorite because it allows me to focus on things that are important and making sure they get done. So this goes directly back to the quadrant that Joe shared on urgency and importance. And by taking 20 minutes on Friday to plan the most important things in all 3 categories: personal relationships, personal, relationships, and professional, we make sure that the important but maybe not urgent things are making it onto our calendar. So the idea is to take 20 minutes, spend 5 minutes identifying what those important but not urgent things are, schedule them into your calendar for 3 minutes, sort out any logistics that are coming up. So do you need to take dinner to work because you have a late activity happening? Is there a handoff that needs to happen somewhere? Remove any unnecessary items, and then take 5 minutes to think about not the weekend that's going to be starting in a few hours, but the weekend that's happening a week from then. This is really helpful because it allows you to pivot more quickly if necessary. And I think one of the advanced moves here that a friend shared with me, and I have started doing that I love, is extend your weekend by planning something Friday night and Sunday evening. So your weekend starts not on Saturday morning, but actually on Friday evening. You have plans to look forward to. And your weekend doesn't end Sunday at about noon because you're already starting to think about work, but you're still looking forward to something you're going to be doing Sunday evening. And that can be, I think, very helpful. Tip number 8 is to take one night for fun. So it can be really difficult to set aside a night every week where you're doing something that is just enjoyable. Ideally, signing up for a class, doing something with friends that happens every week forces you to kind of step away from everything that's happening. The major goal here is that you are not responsible for any other human being in this activity. And that can really change your perception of your time agency. Opportunity number 9 is one big adventure and one little adventure every week. So I love this because it kind of plays with our perception of time and how our brain works. So when we generate new memories, that expands time. So when we're having novel experiences, time seems to slow down. So when we're on vacation, the first day can seem like it's been 4 days. And the idea here is to create novelty or create positive intensity in our life to allow time to appear to expand. And so adventure is obviously a matter of perspective. I don't find jumping out of an airplane to be necessarily an adventure, but somebody else might. But what we're really looking for creating moments that we can look forward to and then savor when we're in them. And it may be, as the picture here indicates, visiting a coffee shop that's new to you, going somewhere. A big adventure should hopefully be a couple of hours. A little adventure may just be 5 minutes, but something that you can look forward to. And inertia is always an issue. So kind of thinking of yourself on the other side of that big adventure can help you kind of get over that inertia. And then technical opportunity tip 10 is thinking about your availability boundaries. This is one that I think we get caught up in quite a bit. We make assumptions about the availability we should have. We cannot be 100% available to 100% of the people that want us 100% of the time and maintain our sanity. And so thinking about the assumptions we've made, what are the expected methods of communication for our family, our friends, our work, and when do they need to be able to contact us? What is the expected turnaround time on that contact? And asking what that is can really help. Do we really need the push notifications on our phone on our days off? Do we need to be checking our email every 20 minutes at night? Or does our team know that if there's an emergency, they can call us rather than us having to get in and check our email? So a few helpful tidbits. I love these are from several sources. Thinking about not doing more today than we can completely recover from tomorrow. We can't run a marathon every day. Scheduling a worry time, that can eat up a lot of time. So if we set aside 15 minutes to worry, putting ahead of deadline reminders in our calendar can really help keep us aware of the things that are coming up. And I love this last one. The day is never going to come when we finally have everything under control. And that's actually really good news, because that means we can just take the life that we have and make it the best that we can in our current situation. So these are the books and references that I've used here. And again, we'll be making these available via the PDF. And I will stop sharing. Thank you all.
All right. Thank you, both of you, for your wonderful presentations. I'll just please enter any questions that you have into the chat. There was one that came through, so I guess we'll start with that one. It has to do with setting boundaries. So Dr. El-Khoury, this one's for you. There was a question about whether or not you were immediately successful at keeping your Fridays open for more academic pursuits, or if it took you a while to get that established and if you had any pushback. So if you'd be willing to share about that, that'd be great.
No, I will say it sounds like the question then implies, like, say, from your CLIA director, which means like pushback from the people who are above you in terms of position. I did not have any pushback from my CLIA director, because it's important to understand my organization is a hospital and university organization, and my CLIA director is my university chair who cares more about my academic productivity. Not to say that he doesn't care about clinical work, but he also cares about my academic productivity. So he was supportive. And when I decided to create this, it was really also about communicating this to him beforehand, right? And making sure that he's on board with this. And he is, because in my contract, technically with the university, it says 20% of my time is mine, which is a day a week. I know not everybody has that, but it's important to state that it really depends on what your institution and what your role is in the organization. And you should have that conversation if you feel the need to justify it. I have to more justify it to people who are techs who work with me in the lab, because they're the ones coming to me daily with all of these issues and questions. And I will tell you, because on Friday, before I hung that sign up on the door that says, now I told them every Friday it's going to be all day on Do Not Disturb unless I'm on call. And I'm on call 1 week a month. I have other directors, luckily, who support me for the other weeks. So if I'm on call, I take any clinical call, right? But if I'm not on call, when that sign is on Do Not Disturb, I have certain expectations that I'm not going to be disturbed, especially on Fridays. And I'm like, the only time to disturb me is if A, have you tried going to the attending on call and they were unable to resolve it? Like, I asked them those questions so specifically, and I told them, like, I want you to ask this. Can another attending deal with this? And is it a patient care issue? Like, those are, because otherwise, if it's a technical issue or something else that could be dealt by somebody else, I don't want to be interrupted when I'm trying to get my academic work done. So that is basically kind of, and once I've implemented it, only in the first couple of weeks, I've been interrupted twice. And in those 2 times, I checked them. I asked those 2 questions and they explained. And so they knew they were going to get that. instead of like, otherwise you're letting them kind of write all over your sign in time. So I will just say, like, in general, yes, but it wasn't from the CLIA director, because we've had conversations, they're on board. It was more from the technical staff who I work with daily and who are used to coming to me.
That's great. I think setting boundaries and feeling comfortable doing that and being consistent and transparent is really important. Can build good relationships between you and the rest of your team members. Dr. Wheeler, would you be able to comment on, any strategies that you found useful for setting boundaries for both, maybe research activities at work or for some of your hobbies outside of work?
Yeah, I think so. I have an active hobby that I'm involved in every Tuesday evening. And I teach as part of that hobby. And that has meant that I have a very hard time at which I must finish that day. And so I know that Monday, at the end of my workday, everything's got to be wrapped up. That may leak over into Tuesday evening. So I think in terms of personal boundaries, getting out of work on time and things, having inflexible commitments can actually really help with those boundaries. That also means that I can be flexible for colleagues who may be covering me on a Tuesday. If something emergent has come up, I can be flexible for them on other nights too.
Yeah, thanks. I've actually found that I do daycare pickup for my kids, and I used to linger at work really late before I had kids, and it's very nice to say, I can't, I have to be out of here at 5. That's great. Okay, there was another question actually addressed to both of you about which techniques or tips you found easiest to implement and which ones were most effective. So Dr. Wheeler, do you want to go first on that one?
Sure. In terms of most effective, I think the one big adventure, one little adventure is one that I have found more transformative than I thought, because I hadn't realized how much having something that I planned, that I looked forward to, and then could remember, and making sure that I took a picture on my phone so it pops up in my phone memories as well, would really change my perception of time. So because I do that now, I rarely have the, oh my gosh, where did the winter go? Or where did the fall go? Or where did the summer go? Because I have all of these kind of landmarks to take with me in my memory.
Nice. How about you, Dr. Okwiri?
No, that's an excellent question. I see that coming in from Jackie Hubbard, Dr. Jackie. So I will, it's a great setup because there's a slide I didn't show, which is your homework for everyone for where to get started. And if I may quickly just share that, it's basically this. If you want to get started on this, really, my recommendation is to start by writing your top 16 goals, do the exercise we've talked about, identifying your top 5, going ahead 3 to 4 weeks in your schedule, because usually you're already booked by whatever meetings you've agreed to next week, because that's how people mostly operate. It's on a week-to-week basis. But if you go 3 to 4 weeks ahead in your calendar, you'll find, other than your recurring meetings, there's plenty of open spots, hopefully. And then you can start by scheduling these for yourself and making some of them recurring so you have that time for your goals. And that I found easy to implement because it's just me. I'm blocking my time the way I want to and configuring my day the way I want to. And then as you complete each goal, again, we talked about this, reassess what you bring in and block time for daily activities that are not work related. I talk about some of it is work, but we don't normally block time for it, like emails, or I talked about lunch breaks, urgent time, lab tours. So go ahead and put these in, and then make time in your in your calendar for short walks and or coffee with friends. And to me, I often, when I don't have urgent things, then I have that hour, which I love, then I can go do whatever I want to work on, I can take care of. And finally, make sure you review your environmental controls. If you don't have a sign on your door, you haven't changed your Outlook settings, nothing's going to change. Those are the quickest things you can implement that will really make a difference right away, at least I found.
Great, thanks. Can we talk a little bit about delegation? So this came up in the time management talk about tasks that are that need to be done, but that are urgent, but don't necessarily need to be done by you. So can you share your tips for effective delegation? This is an area that I struggle with a lot, but I would like to be better at.
Dr. Wheeler, you want to go first?
Please go first.
Sounds good. So I may be helpful to say, when initially I started, this was probably one of the hardest things to learn, right? Because you want to do everything yourself. You have a certain way you want it done. So you focus on that task and you try to make it the way you want it. An important piece of delegating is learning to let go of not only the task, but also how the outcome will look like. It may not be exactly how you intended, but actually it may be better. And I love a quote about a story. Clint Eastwood apparently used to do this, where he had a team of 6 people that he used for every movie, and he's done so many of them that his editing team, he got to a point where he would when his recording is done, he lets them go and he goes plays golf on purpose, then comes back and they're already done, and then he reviews it, because he's not micromanaging the process. He's not changing everything every time they try to be involved, because that can actually be harmful to the work relationship and to the other person who's trying to make their own impact and make it work. So delegation, and you have the resources, if you have trainees or if you have technologists or you have people willing to work with you on these different projects, key part is you need to let go and not focus on the process and accept that the outcome may not be exactly as you desire. And to me, that was one of the biggest kind of changes in like learning to let go, letting others take the lead, and then working with them along the way and as they need you to get there. I don't know how helpful that is from a practical perspective, but it's certainly a mindset to say that you have to not essentially micromanage the process and be willing to accept a different outcome than what you originally intended.
I fully echo all of that. I think I have tried to develop better delegation, I have found that I'm not great at delegating in the moment. I'm improving in that. And the way I started was I had too much to do. And so I looked at what I had to do and said, are there things that other people could do and provide me with products? And so in my clinical work, I thought about what are the things that I need to make decisions, because my job in this role is to make decisions that affect patient care. And instead of being the person that collates all of the information, who can help me collate that information? And then on the research side, are there people that I can engage to work with me that would be interested in being first authors or something like that? And I can delegate some of the kind of less important things to them, or things that would be beneficial for them to learn. So for our residents, a lot of them really are not strong in analyzing data. And so giving them the opportunity to analyze data, to even just work in spreadsheets has been really beneficial for them and has taken that off my plate, even if it takes longer in the background than it may have taken me to do. So by sitting down and assessing those things and looking at who I could recruit to kind of help with those, I have found it easier in the moment to be able to delegate, because I can say, okay, this is the information that I will need to make a decision. And I think this is a little long, the other related part to that to me is that nobody reports directly to me. So a lot of this is through kind of influence. And so ensuring that anything that is delegated becomes part of a team effort, and that, if there are technologists that are helping in something, I make sure to explicitly tell their boss that they helped with something and really highlight the things they're doing, so that it encourages people to want to be involved in those kinds of things.
Thanks. Those are both great tips. And I hadn't thought about the making sure that those who I'm delegating to are kind of being recognized for the extra work they might be taking on. So that is great advice. All right, I think we are approaching the top of the hour. So I would like to thank both of our speakers, Dr. Sarah Wheeler and Joel Curry, for giving such wonderful presentations and advice today. I'd also like to thank Jordan and Caitlin and the wonderful EDLM staff for making this event possible. And thank you all for attending today. We look forward to seeing you at future Cycle Wellness Initiative events. Take care.